All right. Welcome, everyone, to Inference Swap with InferenceSwap.com, hosted by Barney's Hub Bootery. I'm so excited to be here. I'm your host, John Pappas, and my buddy across the table from me is...
Chris
Moranis. We're so excited that he's here today. Guys, we are super excited about being with you in this new season. We're in Season 3, Episode 4. I hope you listened to the sermon that I did last week. I sort of threw that up. Chris didn't even know I threw that up there because it was sort of one of those things I got asked to speak. But it was very cool to get to be in Highland, Indiana, and speak to that congregation about grace and what we're proclaiming to the world. But what's been going on with you, Chris? Chris came in today a little concerned. So let's get into it, man. How are you feeling over there, Chrissy?
I'm sure we'll get into it as we start tackling into the
chapter. Oh, we're in. We're in right now, homeboy. We are totally in. And I'm excited. Like, I knew going into this that it was going to be a thing. And for those you don't know, we are in The Mystery of Christ by Robert Farrar Capon. The reason we chose this is it does bring up a lot of content and questions that is easier to talk about it when somebody else brings up than us bringing it up. So our point in this dialogue, I guess, is to see what it challenges, see what boils to the surface, and have a discussion about it, not so somebody wins the argument, but so that we might be feeling ways you're feeling, and these things are definitely challenging to us. So the book that we're going through is The Mystery of Christ by Robert Farrar Capon. And last episode 2, we started with chapters 2 and 3, and how it works is chapter 1 is always Robert Farrar Capon interviewing or counseling somebody, and then the odd chapters is a group of people that are listening in from the outside, and then they bring their questions of, like, why didn't you say this, or why did you do this, or why didn't you do that? Last time we did an episode, it was The Mystery of Guilt. And this one is called The Mystery of Forgiveness, which is amazing, and I think that's a good key. So we talked about Helen last week and The Mystery of Guilt, and if you haven't heard that, I want to recommend that you go back and heard it. I know we talked for a long time, and we hammered out some things. You know what I'm saying? And I'm watching Chris around. He's getting ready. He's got his highlights. He's got his questions. I can feel the pushback through the microphone right now. But the point of it is that these are some things that we're not used to talking about, and we like our Christianity clean. We want it with no wrinkles, and with some face cream that we wake up a little better than the day after than the day we are today. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's sort of an issue with Christianity. What do you think?
Only time will tell.
Only time will tell? Don't you think that we like our Christianity clean? We don't want any problems. We want it to just be this thing that we have. It's nice and tidy. And we don't want it to be like where we're questioning or that doubt could be used for a good thing. And we're sort of bringing the inference part of this, like, what are we actually believing? What are we proclaiming to the world?
Yeah, and that's the thing we've talked about many times before, is that when we read Scripture, it is just so natural. There's not a way to really get away from it unless you are intentional. When you read something like Scripture, you're naturally going to read those traditions or just those beliefs that have been handed down to you into the text. And so what books like this are really good for, even if you don't agree with the conclusion,
Absolutely.
is that he's driving you back to the text and making you ask, do you really believe what you think you do? Or more importantly, is what you currently believe, do you even have support in Scripture to even hold that belief? Or is it something you were taught outside of Scripture and you kind of just maybe even read into it or try to bring something to light that's not really there in the text?
I agree. Absolutely. Well, last week we talked about a woman named Helen who had an affair. She was having an adulterous affair, right? And this week we got a new guy. And so last week, if you didn't know, it's called The Mystery of Guilt. And what he did was counsel her on what and how she viewed in her relationship with God. Mm-hmm. In other words, who did she actually believe God was?
Right.
which we find out that her God was a transactional God, and that's just not how God works. And we all wanted him to go, hey, you're not supposed to commit adultery. Don't do that. You hurt
Right.
people when you do that. Which is, to him, what he was saying was the lightest and easiest form of counseling, if you want to call it that is out there. But I think what was being said in that first chapter is the mystery of guilt is when we believe in Jesus or God or what he's done on our behalf the wrong way. And then we start believing and making transactions that don't need to be made because that's not who God is or what he's done on our behalf. That we don't deal with God on the level of transaction, but on a level of grace, of a level coming as a son or a daughter. And I think as we understand and go forth in these chapters, they don't get easier, and they challenge us a lot more. And Chris is looking at me serious right now. He's very serious right now. Now today we're going to talk about Micheal. You want me to get into this, or you want to start here?
Oh, go for it. Yeah.
So Micheal comes into his office, and he is sort of a graphic designer, I think, or some form of a designer artist.
Right. Yeah.
He's an artist. And the problem is, and it's going to be just like this adultery thing, that he comes in and he's really upset because his relationship has been broken.
Right.
Right? And what we find that it's not a normal relationship that we would consider in the church. It's a homosexual relationship that he has. And what we all want to do again is tell him, hey, like if you weren't in this kind of a relationship, you wouldn't be going through what you're going through. So it's sort of like he's treating it like it would be like a normal guy and a girl.
Right.
That's the only way I know how to say this. So if I'm offending anyone, I don't mean to. I'm just telling you, like, we're used to in the church normal relationships of a man and a woman.
Yep.
And he's counseling this guy in his relationship with whoever that guy's name is. I don't remember his name.
Brad, I think.
Brad, like it's a normal relationship. And I'm going to tell you, I'll start this off. It irked me from the beginning because I grew up I'm a little older than you, so like as hardcore as you might think church is about this kind of thing, which I don't know your view. I really don't. I think to a degree, Chris and I don't want to speak for Chris, but I think we're both very compassionate towards hurting people. Mm-hmm. And we would love anybody. So it's not the, hate the sin, love the sinner kind of crap. It's just love people and whatever's going on, be there.
Yeah.
I think that's where you fall and where I fall a little bit. At least I think we can agree on that, yeah?
Absolutely.
So, but I grew up in there's no such, this is absolutely, it's not only a sin, but it's a depravity that shows how far the world has fallen from God. Right? So, if you were in the first chapter and you heard us talking, we were like, just tell the guy, stop committing adultery. We keep waiting for him to go dude, you're a homosexuality. You get what you deserve.
Right.
And he doesn't do it. This conversation is tough.
Yeah.
I'm a pastor, a missionary with a denomination that has a set of beliefs about this issue. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, did this make you feel uncomfortable?
Actually, not so much. And we can get in later maybe where my position falls in, but I have absolutely no problem the way he handled his conversation with him. Because I think I think you would agree as well that if he did, he said he's met with Micheal many times, so he knows who Micheal is. So the fact that he said he came with a broken, same-sex relationship, that's not going to be a surprising thing,
right.
To him. But the fact that, and because of that, I think Capone knows, well, if I say my position, affirming or denying right away, that's just going to completely derail the main purpose of what I think this guy needs to hear from me.
Yes, and Capone is always going to present who God is and what he's done, above and beyond any sin. Right?
Right, yeah.
Yeah. And so this guy, was it Micheal? Mm-hmm. He starts talking to him about his feelings, his hurt, his anger.
Right.
And we as observers want him to go like, what about the homosexuality, right? Like what about this part of it? You're skipping over this part.
Yeah.
And you're talking to him like he's a real person.
Right.
Imagine that. You know what I mean? That's really what it is. He's talking to him like a real person.
Right.
Who's in love, who has this relationship that I don't necessarily know where to fall on because of the way I grew up. No question, because of the way I grew up. I know where this is going to fall, and we're going to get into it. But I want to go through a little bit of what he starts talking about, which is the mystery of forgiveness. He says, what feeling? Are you feeling hurt and anger? And he said, both. What difference does it make? As he's counseling me, and I don't even know what page I'm on, Chris, but he says, it makes a difference. It makes a lot of difference. Hurt you have to wait out, but one way or another, as long as you don't deny it or shove it so far down that it festers, it goes away. But anger, though, doesn't go away by itself. It's not enough just to avoid repressing it. You have to make a deliberate effort to get rid of it. You have to forgive even a bastard. So what we find out is that Brad cheats on Micheal.
Right.
And we're trying to figure out why. That's what the conversation actually goes for. Right. And he's bringing in this idea of you're going to have to forgive him.
Yeah.
Because whatever hurt there is, you are a part of that hurt.
Right.
Yeah? How do you feel about him going into this conversation like this?
Yeah, I have, like I said, I truly have no objections to the way he initially, handles everything. And so, because I think any counselor, Christian or non-Christian, that you go to, the baggage that you bring in is going to be nothing but that surface level of what's really happening underneath.
Yeah.
And from just a pure listener, that's, I think, an amazing gift that Capone has been showing, is that he has a wonderful gift of discernment and listening to people and hearing what's really beneath the surface and how do we address that. It's not about what the action you committed, it's what's brewing underneath the surface that action may not even have a connection to.
And what's interesting is we find out that Micheal is questioning his homosexuality to a degree.
Correct.
And he's bringing it into this relationship where it is a homosexual relationship, and it's making the other guy uncomfortable to the point where the other guy doesn't want to be around him. And he ends up cheating on him because he doesn't want to have that conversation, right? And Micheal, I think, how's he taking that? He's sort of taking it as like, well, there's something wrong with him.
Right.
But really, it's this conversation that he doesn't want to. He's more interested in being a homosexual than figuring out why he's a homosexual.
Well, part of the issue, he talks about is that what Micheal does is he skirts away from the issue that he could even possibly have even 1% of an issue that caused his, ex-boyfriend or whatever to, cheat on him. He actually says, I think at one point he points out, yeah, I fully, talked to Brad about all of my insecurities about being gay, but that's because aren't we supposed to have that one person that we can just give every single detail of our life to, every pain, every hurt? From what it sounds like, he just, this guy Brad was the person that he wanted such longing and deep intimacy with, and Brad just
was a surface guy. That. Yeah, he just was a surface guy, right?
Yeah.
And in Capone's dealing with the way he's feeling, rather than the, like you said, the action or so the issue in the room isn't homosexuality. It's this intimacy, what you're looking for in love, mm-hmm. which I guess could be a little bit about homosexuality, but that thing that they're doing is already. They're not trying to change that. They're trying to figure out why he feels this way. Would you agree? Which is we can't get past the first thing.
Right.
He's already established the first thing. And Capone is talking about this idea of forgiveness in this relationship as an idea brought to us by God. And it's part of the good news, right?
Yeah.
And so he basically goes, this guy's a bastard, but you got to forgive him. And he's like, even a bastard? And he's like, and only partly because forgiving is a nice thing to do for a person who wasn't nice. Mostly you have to do it for yourself, which was what you were saying. You know, you're basically saying, like, any counselor's going to tell you, you can't let somebody have this over you in your heart,
right,
to create that bitterness. Because unless you do, you're inviting that bastard to take residence inside you indefinitely, which is brilliant. You're allowing that hurt to live where it shouldn't live.
Right. Well, I think, like, to use a more modern church expression, like father wounds. That's talked a lot about in church.
Yeah.
And if you want to take the word, the homosexuality bit out of it and say Brad was his father who disrespected him, and Michael's coming to Robert with the same issue, Robert's going to say the same thing. You got to forgive your dad, even a bastard. Yeah, especially because if you don't, that wound that he's inflicted upon you will never heal. Actually, what will end up happening is it's going to decay and spread to the rest of your body, and it'll become an all-consuming force that will lead to nothing but death. That's right.
Thank you. And here's what's weird. Now we're describing this conversation, but the book is called The Mystery of Christ.
Right.
This is what's so weird about it. And I'm telling you, like, as soon as they read the word homosexuality, I was just like, oh my God, I don't even know if I can talk about this on a podcast. Can we talk about this in the church? Can we talk about the feelings of such people, the relationships of such people?
Yeah.
How do, and I think, without moving forward, because we're going to keep moving forward because this is a deep chapter.
Yeah.
This is an issue we have to address in our time. This issue of relationships, same-sex relationships. I just go back and forth. I know the scriptures. I know what people are thinking. You do too. I know you know them. You know I know them. We know the Romans, the Corinthians, the Leviticus, all this stuff. We know it. We've heard it. We've heard the theories. We've heard all of it. But at the end of the day, these are people. That's what I keep coming back to. I may not agree with a lot of things people do, but if we're going to bring this back around to what is good news and what is it to be a disciple, what are we proclaiming to the world, we have to talk about this issue.
Right.
It's not I don't have all the answers. I mean, I don't, But at the end of the day, I keep coming back to this place where this is a real person and who has a real life. And
not only is this a real person with a real life, this is a divine image bearer of God that is wholly, loved by God.
And I think we need to think about that, Chris, as we think about the meaning of these two chapters. I think that's a really big emphasis as we think about. So what I mean by that is these two chapters, like every two chapters, which is really one chapter, it's him doing a counseling session and then all the people complaining about why he didn't say what he said. And then he tells them why, right? That's basically what it is. But the first one was called The Mystery of Guilt. This one's called The Mystery of Forgiveness. We need to remember what's the overall point within all of this stuff. This, to me, is like life. We're trying to figure it out, trying to figure it all out. Stuff is coming at us left, right, work, friendships, relationships, girlfriend, boyfriend, dating, not dating, parents, all of it, whatever's going on. There's all this stuff coming at, and we can lose bearing of what this chapter in our life is about. This chapter is about. And I think we can't forget that. Like, this is an image bearer of Christ. We often think that those image bearers are only in the church. And I think we're learning what? God loved the world. And we were all made in the image of God. Yeah? So, he basically says forgiving's not that easy. It's essential. It's basically essential. But then he goes on to this tangent And he gives this, what is it called, an anagram? Is that what it's called? AARG?
Oh, yeah. I know what you're talking about.
Now,
Acronym.
Not an anagram. What am I thinking?
You think of the enneagram. That's a picture of the acronym.
Yeah. So what's it called? An acronym?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So he gives them, he goes like, before we go on, let's look at this anagram. Is that right? Acronym. I don't know why I can't say it. And he says ARAG. And he says it stands for anger, romance, angels, and gossip. And he goes into this whole thing about angels, romance, anger, and gossip. Now, did that throw you off? What did you think about this part of it?
Well, before he got into, what he's talking about, when I first read it, I'm like, okay, anger, check, romance, check, angels. It's kind of like, wait, what does that have to do with anything?
Right.
Because, of course, and he talks about this later, is in his term of angels, he's not talking about necessarily, what we think of like in the church is like some angelic being and in the ethereal spiritual space.
Right.
It's actually more of a placeholder of systems.
Nice. I agree. And he goes into this. Why does he go into that?
With the angel part or
Yeah.
just the whole thing?
The whole thing. So what we're saying is he gets into this conversation about forgiveness, and then he says, you need to learn this acronym.
Mm-hmm.
And go ahead, Chris. You're doing a good job.
Well, I guess I would have to think of a little bit more. You'll have to fill me in on the anger part. How about that?
Let's just go through it real quick. So for the people that are listening, so he goes, when we're talking about your relationship and forgiveness, I want you to think of anger, romance, angels, and gospel. Anger first. The key to understanding anger is that it always arises out of the sense of justice. Mm-hmm. You can't truly get angry at someone unless you've convinced yourself that you've been willfully deprived of something that was rightfully due to you, right? And in this relationship, he had assumed that, like what you were saying, this intimacy, there was a transaction. Like if I give you intimacy,
right.
I get intimacy.
Right.
And instead, he got betrayed.
Right.
By his intimacy was almost like offensive to this person in the relationship as a place that person wasn't ready or willing to go. Mm-hmm. And so it basically becomes forgiveness is too lordly or one-sided exercise, and the object of forgiveness is the restoration of a relationship, which is very true. Like the object of forgiveness isn't to like, I forgive you, but I forgive you for what? You know what I mean? Like we do that. For what do you forgive me for, Chris? What is it that I'm forgiving you for? And we want to be right, mm-hmm. But that's different than restoration of a relationship. So anger sends this, it makes us have to forget the very thing that has offended us deeply.
Yeah.
Right? Or forgive the very thing that is. And he goes into why this is so profound. He says, if you think about death of God incarnate in Jesus on the cross, what is it that if not the gift of God silenced to the world? After a millennia of divine jawbone about holiness, of justice, and wickedness of sin, I think this is what you were talking about earlier, God himself simply shuts up about the whole business. He dies as a criminal under the curse of law, as to say, look, I'm as guilty as you are in this situation because I set it up in the first place. Let's just forget about blame and get on with the party. So, Chris, let's give this over to you. You had a problem with this. I understand what he's saying.
Sure. And
of course, me saying that makes it set up like you don't, but you had a problem with this.
And I've told you, I freely admit it.
Go ahead.
Like, I want to be charitable to the guy. Maybe I'm just completely misunderstanding.
First of all,
him,
let's say
being
this.
lost in,
Wait.
forgetting
Let
to
me
see
say
the
this. Let me
forest
say
for the
this. Let me
trees.
say this before you get rolling, because I
Okay.
know you're going to get rolling. You don't have. We are not here to agree on every single issue, and we're going to struggle with different things. I struggled right away with the homosexuality thing. You know what I'm saying? We're going to struggle with different. So we're not. We want to be open as we can about how we're feeling as we're going through this with you. So let me read this again, because this I don't know if it offended you or it bothered you. It's something that's stuck in your craw. Would I be right? Is this the passage you were thinking of?
Yeah.
Okay, it says, so he's talking about forgiveness of sins. So it does matter how you interpret this. Okay, he says, if you think about the death of God in Jesus Christ on the cross, what is that if not the gift of God's silence to the world after a millennia of divine jawboning about the holiness and justice of wickedness of sin? God himself simply shuts up about the whole business. We'll just leave it there. So I feel like I know what he's saying there. What drives you crazy about that?
I guess for me, the way when I read that, I've told you before, I've read this multiple times to make sure I'm not trying to read it, uncharitably or anything. I want to make sure.
I don't think you're a bad guy.
But basically, just in a real brief nutshell, the way it comes across to me is, the way he even says it, just after a millennia of basically harking on you guys about the holiness of justice and the wickedness of sin. I'm just like, I'm fed up of, just talking about this. Let's just shut up and have a party and just...
I don't see that part. That's not what he's saying. He's saying...
he says he shuts up about the whole business.
Yeah, I agree with that. He did, yeah.
Or God's silence to the world.
Yeah,
I guess,
love it.
Like, maybe if you can tease that out more, what does he mean by God's silence?
Well, I want to hear what do you think he's saying?
I truly don't know what that statement means. God's silence.
Well, why does it bother
world.
you though? Like, because I think it would bother other people too.
Well, it's technically the last phrase. That
the silence.
No. That you didn't read on the second time, which is, God Himself under the so God simply shuts up about the whole business. He dies as a criminal under the curse of the law.
Yep.
Just
as if to say.
True. Yeah, to say, look, I'm guilty as you are in this situation because I set it up in the first place. Let's just forget about our blame and get on with the party.
Yep. Okay.
So it's almost as when I initially read it, what I'm hearing is everything I said about the Old Testament. It's my fault. It's my bad, guys. Like here's this cross thing. We're done with it. Like, I'm just not gonna. This whole Old Testament that was just wrong. I'm sorry. Let's just forgive each other and have a party and have a good time.
Well, I think you have to go back and read everything in context. Okay,
right.
So he is a guy that uses, very poignant language in order to get his point across, and it's funny sometimes, and other times it's bothersome.
Right.
And I think it's meant to do both. But the previous paragraph right before it, he's talking about forgiveness is the restoration of relationship and a device that works by both resurrection and death of the forgiver. The forgiver is dropping dead to his right for justice so that he, at the least, he himself can rise to the possibility of a restored relationship. And so when I read this, if you think about so I read the next thing down.
Mm-hmm.
It says, if you think about the death of God incarnate in Jesus on the cross, what is it if not the gift of God's silence? In other words, on this topic of the blame game, of blaming or holding grudges or unforgiveness, it's over. I'm taking care of this. I'm going to become the divine criminal on a cross, and I'm going to just silence the whole conversation. So now, because I have forgiven, you must forgive, or you have the right to forgive, or he's led by example. And so when I see this, it's not about a blame game. It's about the idea that forgiveness is bought by the cross
Okay.
for the restoration of relationship. And I think when we get into a lot of scripture, and I've mentioned this before, and I'm going to go into it a little bit. I know this is going to, me and you've talked off air about this, but I think Jesus in his wisdom was worried about what, at any point in time, let's say they killed Jesus prior to the cross, what would have been the message of the disciples?
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about this whole thing with the walking on the water and all of
I
this.
think you talked about that recently.
Yeah, we were talking about that, and that was my sermon. If you want to hear it in the last
That's what I was
podcast,
pointing to.
yeah. So
There's a plug for your sermon.
thank you. Go listen to that sermon, because what would they have left? Would they have left forgiveness or this weird grace with more law? You get what I'm saying? So it's like, yeah, I forgive you, but if you do A, B, and C, and D, or if you're a little bit more like me, or if you're holy like me, and we find that the power of the gospel is his righteousness on our behalf. Romans 1:16 and 7. I don't want to quote scripture here because I'm smart or anything.
Go ahead and quote the whole thing. You know what it is.
But I do see this in that, like, God is offering grace, and we always have to touch it. We always have to play with it. We always have to add, and we have to tinker it and shape it into something we believe rather than what he's doing. And Capone has this odd, weird way of bringing it into these conversations that we don't like. I don't like this conversation about homosexuality and being right up front with it. I didn't grow up that way. I don't know if I would have took this counseling session. I don't know. Like, I'm challenged in that. Do you get what I'm saying? And just like with the adulterous lady, my first words out of my mouth would have been, stop sinning in your adultery. That's the problem. That's the root to all of this. But it's not, right?
Yeah.
It's what they believed about God.
Right.
And he goes back to this idea of, in his relationship, he's not believing in restoration for his own sake, dying for his own sake. And in our relationship, any long-term relationship, I think even in our relationship, Chris, I've had to die things. You've had to die to my bluntness in our conversations before, right? I mean, we've had this relationship, but it's drawn us closer together because we're willing to not just see that moment for the whole person. Do you get what I'm saying? I don't know. I'm speaking out of turn here, but when I read this is how I read that. Like, he's going the idea that God, on this whole judgment thing, that's silenced. It's done. It's over. It's finished.
Okay, so when you're saying, that this silence is that it's been silenced on him, in the sense
there's nothing more to say about it.
Right.
Other than what he's done. And that's how I read that. When Jesus died on the cross, this whole idea of being holy, like religious holy, like there's still a bunch of religions. We're in one, a denomination that is all about holiness, all about living up to that thing. A higher standard is what they call it, right? You got to be a higher standard. Well, what if you can't live up to that? And what we're saying is Jesus' cross was sufficient. Like, there's no higher standard. There's just faith in Christ. Just faith, Chris. We're going to get into that too, right? But that's where do you see that? I said,
there's
no justice to be had in unforgiveness.
Right. Okay.
That is silenced. So, part of the problem with the world today is it has this quasi-weird standard of justice that it's implicating to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And instead of dying to that thing and silencing it and learning how to love what's in front of you, what doesn't matter the skin color, what kind of relationships they're having, this is the message for the church today. Whether, it doesn't matter if you believe homosexuality is right or wrong.
Right.
It doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter. That's not where we're taking our stand. Would you agree? Like, yeah. I'm taking my stand on grace. the grace that was offered me in my worst. And my worst is no different than their worst if the worst is their worst. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Okay.
it's just the idea of, like, we're not here to tell everybody what they're doing is wrong and try to fix it. It's like we're proclaiming something bigger, deeper, more, and that thing will do what it does.
Right, and I think it might even have said it last week on the podcast. I know we definitely talked about it off air. Is back to that Romans 1:16. For I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of salvation for those who believe. That's the focus. Is do
Yes.
we truly trust that the gospel has the power that it does?
That's
And then when
that's
we try to
really the
step
issue.
when we try to step in and muddle it with it ourselves, it becomes less powerful. And that's not to say we take a full hands-off approach. God's mission includes us.
I think the wrong approach for Christians to take is to start with our offenses
Yeah,
to the world.
yeah.
This is where I'm taking my stand. This is it for me.
Yeah.
I'm taking my stand on beer. I'm taking my stand on homosexuality.
Yeah.
That's the wrong message.
There's if you don't mind me interjecting real quick.
I would love for you to interject real quick so I can
There's
shut
another,
up.
There's another podcaster. I won't say.
What? There's somebody
I know there's
smarter than
another
us?
I'm sorry I betrayed you. Forgive me.
What a jerk. I don't know if I can forgive him in the mystery of forgiveness.
But the one thing he always says, which I really like, which is anytime he says, to me, I'm always the biggest sinner in the room because I don't know their sins, but I do know mine. And so if I take the posture of I'm the biggest sinner in the room, it's not just, that I condone and accept everything they do. It's that if I put myself in that posture, I can see them as, loved image bearers, people who not only have something to offer, but they have something to offer me. Even if they don't have something I agree with, they can still bless me, and I can bless them in return.
And I agree. And you know who does that in the Bible the most? It's Paul. See, we pedestal Paul in the Bible for the accomplishment of everybody that he reached in all these different areas and his willingness to give up his life to do an apostolic ministry, to break new ground, right? But he says to everybody, after all these things that he says, and the danger of the Bible, the danger of the New Testament, is to forget about grace and read in between, like, for example, in Romans 1 through 3, to emphasize 2, like 1:17 or 18 through up to the chapter 3, and forget about 3:1 through 26 in chapter 1:16 and 17. We emphasize his ramblings in there more than the premise of the ramblings.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And go ahead.
I'll just say what's like just a touch on that, because with the topic of homosexuality, of course, Romans 1:18 through 26 or whatever it is such a popular, set, that we naturally go to and stuff. But the one thing, whether or not, whatever your position on this is something really important that Paul is teasing out, is 1:18 to, I think it's 26, is not merely just his synopsis of everything. It's actually a rhetorical device he's using to set the person up to go, yeah, I'm better than that person.
Yeah.
And then in 2:1 he goes, by the way, you who judge them, you're condemned. Like, you're already condemned as well.
Absolutely. And think about how many scriptures, like when we get into the condemnation, like, see, this is a sin, this is a sin, and this is the point. The sin is the point, right? We bring in all these different scriptures from all these other different books, and we don't even understand what he's writing in those 3 chapters. Do you get, like, we're not understanding the context of these 3 chapters. We're bringing in our ideas or his ideas from other chapters that are completely about different things, like Galatians or, Colossians or whatever. Like, we bring them that context into a different context and try to justify what we think about as sin or unforgiveness. And we forget this beautiful open door of grace in all that it and all its inheritance. You know what I mean? And we choose to be accusatory rather than forgiving. And we choose to offend rather than to be in relationship. I know 1,000 Christians that go to church every Sunday. I don't see too many of them in conversations with those who don't think like themselves or act like themselves. And all of them would call themselves a disciple. That's hard for me to take, bro.
Yeah, missing out on the richness of being with other people who don't think like you.
Oh,
it's truly a gift.
How about just the relationships?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know this guy, what's it, Micheal in this chapter, but if I can back off of I don't even know what those are, my prejudices that I bring, or maybe they're legitimate things, it doesn't matter. If I can see him as a person and hear his story and begin to hear his concerns with his life, I mean, aren't we supposed to bring good news to that? It's not for me to change his life or to tell him how bad his life sucks or how great it is, or to be enamored either way, because we get enamored either way. We get enamored of both extremes, right? The extreme of judging this person for their lifestyle, or the extreme of I want to be like Charles Stanley or William Lane Craig, or pick one, Ravi Zachariah. No, I'm just kidding. But look that up and you'll understand why that's funny. But we get enamored either way. Or I want to be like Brad Pitt if you want to be an actor. Or you want to be like Queens of Stone Age if you're a guitar player. Whatever. Like, we get enamored either way, and we miss all the substance in the middle. And I think that's what's happening in this conversation. We're living on our extremes.
Well, just think about, the disciples Christ chooses. So of course at the beginning he chooses Peter and Simon and John and James, and they're, typical Jewish fishermen. But then you have Matthew, the guy who has sold out himself to their oppressors, and are also then taxing on adding fees on top of it to gain richness off of his own people. There's one person that's in the mix. And then you have Simon the Zealot later on. This is a guy who went out in the wilderness to train how to kill people.
Yeah.
And this guy's in their mix. And then you have, obviously Judas Iscariot is in the mix as well. And so, yeah, you have this whole group of people.
You know what's odd about that? Can I interject? Sure. I'm sorry. You have this whole group of people. What were you going to say? Because I don't want to say what you were going to say. I think we were going to say the same thing. Go ahead.
Well, I was just saying that
you don't see any passage of scripture where Jesus sits them down and does a sozo or tries to go, hey, I know what your future holds. Like he's the Jedi mind trick. You know what I mean? But if you just fix A, B, and C and follow me, you know what I mean? He allows them to do who they are.
Right.
And in the midst of who he is, they don't see who they are. That's the sad part.
Yeah. And I don't know. I know I've talked to you about it before. I don't know if you've seen the Chosen series yet.
No, it's rated R.
What?
Is that rated R? No, I'm just kidding. No, I haven't had time. I hear great things.
It is. It's really good.
I do hear great things.
But there's one really poignant scene which I absolutely love, and this is something we could definitely take as an example. It's when Matthew, in the show, he plays kind of a shadowy background figure in the first couple episodes.
Okay.
And
a tax collector, yeah.
Yeah, the tax collector. And so in one of the episodes, though, Simon and all of them around, and Jesus walks by Matthew's tax booth, and and Jesus turns around and looks at Matthew, and at this point Matthew knows who Jesus is, and all he says is, follow me, and Matthew, gets out, and what's really funny, it's not really funny, but I think it's highly predictable, is that Peter pulls Jesus to the side and says, no, you don't know who this is. This guy has ripped us off. He's sold out his country. He's working for the oppressors. We cannot have this. You don't know who this is, Jesus.
Yeah.
He cannot be one of us. And Jesus just looks at Peter and says, no, then I want him. And that's it. That's the end of the scene. Matthew comes with them. And then
all of that drama, and Jesus is like, no, man.
It's like, Matthew's the guy.
So why did that speak to you?
That because the way people may live or the beliefs they may have, they can turn us off so much that we miss what God's already doing in their life. And we want to take the initiative to correct them, to bring them before God blameless, instead of, like you've talked about before, of recognizing, God, you're already working in their life.
Uh-huh.
How can I just sit in that?
So like
work?
hearing you talk, like this is the dichotomy I see in old Chris here. Is like you have a problem with the silence of God through the justice of the cross, but you embrace that. Why? What's the problem? Is it this thing in the past that's haunting you now? Is it
No.
a set of beliefs that has been imposed on you that you're rearranging? What?
Well, I'm
are you
always
rearranging furniture, bro?
I'm
Theological
always
furniture.
rearranging furniture.
You are.
I always am, and that's and I call that discipleship.
You know what? I love that about you. Me
Yeah.
too.
Yeah,
You know,
just to be open that
I'm just older, so I've rearranged a few more things.
you got some scuff marks on the floor from pushing it so many times.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like I said, for me, when I heard silence to the world, I heard like everything that follows in the New Testament. Like, it's almost, and this is where I'm saying I think I just misunderstand Capone a lot of times. That when it's God's silence to the world, it's Christ dies and that's it. Like, in the sense that why even do anything more, other than just like sit on the beach and drink Mai Tais and wait till the end.
Yeah.
That's what I hear.
Yeah.
Not that it's now silence to the world, so that you are now truly free when you embrace who I am and what I've done for you, and that allows you to walk in that freedom to help liberate and not liberate, but help show other people the liberating power of the gospel.
Yeah. And what is that? Like, what are we learning here? So, I don't want to answer my own question. So, I know I don't want to put you on the spot,
Sure.
but what, according to where we're at in this book, what is that answer? What is that liberating power?
Oh,
have you figured that out yet?
Forgiveness? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is it? It's that justice has been taken care of. That justice is done.
Yeah.
That he took all of that and satisfied justice so that we wouldn't have to satisfy it on each other, so we could have grace towards each other and forgiveness towards each other and love, and not start from judgment.
Yeah, and that is in the traditional, I'm thinking of like the traditional tract Romans Road style of witnessing of, if I asked you tonight if you were to die, where are you going to go? It's already laced with so much guilt.
Yeah.
And, and then like this, justice of, well, kind of like I'm thinking of, what's that guy's name that has that YouTube series where he like goes around on campuses and says, do you believe that, do you believe this? Do you think you're going to go to heaven? Have you ever had anger in your heart? Have you ever done this? Well, you're a transgressor of the law. You're this, you're that. And it's just like.
Yeah, and who wants to be in that session? Like, yes, I'm a sinner. Yes, I suck. Yes, I watched, I've seen porno. Yes, I've had bad thoughts. Yes,
Yeah.
I would cuss today. You know what I mean? Yes, it's just endless. You know what I mean? And I think that the most gasp I got out of my sermon was, I said, the problem with this world is not sin. It's grace. That's the problem with this world. We'll embrace sin.
Yeah.
We will embrace sin. But a free gift? What's up with that? We have a problem with that. That's too good to be true. We got it. It's got to be more than, you got to have some fruit. You got to have some behavioral change, Chris. You know what I'm saying? You gotta do this, that, or the other. Have to, don't do, whatever. That's the problem. It's such good news. It cannot be true.
Right.
That's the problem with this world. But I don't hear that being proclaimed. No matter what station I look to, as far as these church leaders, these I don't know, evangelical preachers or whatever you want to call them. What do you call them? TV evangelists. They're not out there proclaiming that. They have some other great thing to give us, some spiritual thing to set us free from,
Right.
some demonic thing to keep us away from, or it's always built around some kind of fear or some kind of gift from the Lord, like tithe 10%, get 100-fold back kind of thing. There's all.
Where do I sign up for that?
I want that. I want in that grift, man. But you know what I'm saying? It's always this thing that's out there, but it's not just grace. It can't be just grace. And that's what we're really wrestling with here. And you're wrestling with it, and I'm wrestling with it. We're wrestling what is too far, what is not enough. How far do we go in our relationships? How do we live in such freedom? Yeah. How do we live in this freedom? And that's the heart. And that's why we're asking the questions like, why didn't you tell that adulterous woman to stop committing adultery? Right? Because that's our natural posture as sinners, not as people that have been saved by grace. Mic drop, boom. All right, we got to keep moving on because we're getting...
Might have to do a part 2 on
We're
this.
definitely doing a part 2 on this. So we're into... The first one was anger. And, of course, in that anger, we see that we're facing problems into fresh situations, and we have to be able to be set free from that, or those problems or those people will take residence where they should not. But then he goes into this thing called romance, right? And he basically goes, where did you get the idea in this conversation? We're talking about romance now. Remember what is it called? The
acronym.
Acronym. I was going to call it the analogy.
The anagram.
Anagram. So it's an acronym. First was anger. Now it's romance. And he's talking about his hurt. And he says, where did you get this idea that infidelity is the unforgivable sin? Dang, dude, that's rough. Remember in the first one, he said, where did you get this idea that you could that you had to keep promises to God? He always has this one poignant, question that he asks. Where did you get this idea that infidelity is the unforgivable sin? And he basically says, whoever told you that romance was the Holy Spirit? I'll tell you who. Romance herself, the great white queen of all our fantasies. It's the goddess of love, the bright angel who we invite into preside over all our human love affairs and turn them into tests that no mere mortal could pass. I love that. She's the one that talks us into swearing love and fidelity till the stars fall, even though we can't toast an English muffin right 2 times hand running. I don't even know what that means, but he's basically saying it's like romance makes perjurers of us all. There's a lot of truth to that, brother.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Oh, I honestly loved his section on romance. Yeah.
In marriage, infidelity is just one more sin, like the burning of muffins.
Yeah, that obviously, when I read that, I was like, what?
Only more distressing. You can forgive it or not as you like, but nobody in his right mind ever said you were bound by some angelic law not to forgive. Here's that angel thing that we're going to get to. But in romance, with a capital R under the aegis of angel, forgiveness never. It's unthinkable, unspeakable, undoable, and blasphemous to boot. So we have this thing that's above grace. Romance. The romance of God. Jesus is my lover. Jesus is my best friend. This romance that we bring to, I think of a lot of romantic, cultist Christian things out there, like Jesus culture, something like that.
Oh, sure.
Where they bring this romantic romance of a relationship with God into the picture. And
right. That's how, of course not all, but that's how a lot of the mainstream worship songs are.
Absolutely. And there's a danger there. What do you think that danger is?
Well, it's exactly what he had talked about is that the danger in that is that you can so romance and angels. So I would say romance is just an example of the angel, what I take for him to say is that
Spit it out, will you?
what
I'm saying, spit it out, homeboy.
that we value the system more than the person.
Love it.
And so
Thank you for
we
saying
come
that.
with our preconceived notions of what we think this person, in this case that we was talking about with Micheal, that you have this preconceived notion of what you expected of. I actually looked up his name is John, not Brad.
Okay,
but
sorry.
You have this expectation of what John is supposed to fulfill for you. That's your romance,
Yeah.
which is higher than just your love of John himself.
It's higher than grace.
Yeah.
It's higher than everything that. Imagine if God was in a romantic relationship with us, which
Right.
is crazy.
Right.
Like, it's these lofty ideals that move above the reality that we live in, and it's not seeing what's in front of us, but what we want to be in front of us.
Yeah.
It's not seeing who's in front of us, but what we want that person to be. It's not seeing the heart that's in front of us, but the heart that we want to love us back. And when nobody lives up to that, that's a messed up thing. And those are laws. You have to, my wife has to live this way and do this thing. And if you're in a marriage longer than 5 years, everything comes out, whatever that everything is. And you have to love what's in front of you or love the ideal. And as long as you keep making that person live up to the ideal, they're going to hate you. One of my problems I have, I'm just going to say this out in public, I don't know if I should, but one of the problems I have with church world is this lofty ideal of the greater self as opposed to the person that I am in the grace that is before me. And I don't know who can live to that. And I think the world has decided no one can.
Yeah, and just thinking about that what you just described is called that up and to the right mentality. It's always up and to the right. It's never fully achievable. It's always just it's just bare. We can see it, we can almost touch it, but it's just always a hair outside of our grasp. And unfortunately, what we're seeing more and more is that's more of a symptom of the culture bleeding into the church. That if you take the church out of it and you start looking at self-help and all these other things that the culture is talking about, side hustles and all this stuff, that's what it's all about. It's all, your life is always up and to the right. It's this never-ending achievement after achievement, trying to, fully grasp, this thing that is never truly attainable.
Or really there.
Absolutely true. Yeah.
So Chris, you were asking, you were asking, like, how do I see death and resurrection in this? And I think it's pretty obvious, but I want to read you something that's right after this, and it's all about the death. What happens in these churches? Wait, look at me, bro. What happens in these churches is we get off in these tangents, and we think that moving apart from the gospel, moving apart from the death and the resurrection of Christ, we can impart some other kind of knowledge that will be helpful. And that's the lie. That's where we get into trouble. That's where we fall back into religion. That's when grace becomes, there's grace, but you also have to have fruit or have tos, and you can't do this and do, you know what I'm saying? Instead of letting it be what it is. So he says this. It says, romance can't die. This is the problem with romance. Romance can't die for a failed lover. Romance or marriage can't die for a straying wife. And parenthood can't die for a wicked father. But a lover can die for a lover. A husband can die for his wife. A child can die for her parents. The angels can't. We can. And God does. This is the point. There is no real forgiveness outside of understanding what Christ has done on our behalf. Through the gospel, the good news. The good news is that forgiveness is made available. apart from grace, where is forgiveness available? We don't think like that. There's no where does Moses say, I forgive you? Where's the law go? I get it. You're off. You get off now. You know what I'm saying? Like, no, it's all A or not A. You get what I'm saying? And so this is the bigger issue of understanding the deepness of the inheritance of God's grace is not just the law that leads us to grace, but the grace itself that gives us something. It gives us an impartation of God himself, who offers his love, which equals forgiveness. You know what I'm saying? And that only happens as we learn the life of death and resurrection. The willingness to live in freedom as Christ would live, or the death of repentance into the joy of something that is there before we ask for it. It's just like repentance, faith, all those things that were there before we needed it or wanted it or was revealed to us. We get the trust that was never there. We get the faith that was never there. We get the forgiveness that we didn't think we had access to. We only had it access as we saw our lordship over those things. And now we get to die because the relationship is more important than this, the intentions of my heart. That's a true death, man. This kind of forgiveness that he's talking about, you need to forgive this dude that screwed you over big time, because in that death, you're going to get some form of new life that's bigger than you can understand at this moment in your hurt. Because death is not a clean cut. You know what I mean? Is that what you were getting out of this?
No, I think that's good. Yeah. And one thing I heard recently too, you have to tell me what you think about it. It's very,
yeah.
That resurrection power can only be poured out on crosses.
Ooh. Let me think of that. I think death leads to resurrection.
Exactly. That's what it's getting at, is that, obviously Christ and his death on the cross that released resurrection. We are also then called to pick up our own crosses and die so that we can experience that resurrection power as well.
That's great. And we have to realize that this death, the power of grace, the power of death and resurrection, the power of life, the power of death in life, it has to come in real reality. It's not in these romantic terms, in these angelic terms. These are things that we have to do in everyday life, in our relationship, Chris, in my wife's relationship, in your relationship, whoever's in front of you, in our neighbor's relationship. This is why discipleship in the church is not working, because we're not willing to die. We're willing to believe in Jesus' death, but not our own. We're willing to go to the cross and observe his death, but we're not willing to follow and take up our crosses as well. And I think somewhere in the Bible, those things are there. I'm not a genius or anything, but you get what I'm saying. This is like we're talking about gospel issues. And what I want to do, if it's okay with you, Chris, because we've gone about an hour.
Yeah.
And I know me and you could go another hour easily. What I'd like to do is stop it here, because what we've got is into the depth of this conversation. And next week, we're going to come back and talk about what all these people are observing about this counseling session.
Right.
You know what I mean? I think me and you have talked about a lot of the issues, the angiogram. What is that called? Acronym. Anger, angels, romance, and gossip. And we won't even get... The gossip is just a form of not dying and keeping dead issues alive.
Yeah.
And imposing those on other people. It's really giving somebody... it's giving life to death rather than death and then life. Anyway, so we've talked about this first... I guess this would be the third chapter, and we're going to talk about chapter 4 next week, when we see all these different people that he introduced, and I think, let me introduce them tonight, and then we'll cut it off. So what happens now, as we've talked about this conversation between Michael, is it John? We were calling him Brad, but it was John, right? And this homosexual relationship, he's treating it as a relationship in order to show him who God is and what he's done. The next chapter is all these people are observing this conversation, and they're going to have an opinion about what he did or did not say. And so the people that come into play are Alice, a lifelong Episcopalian, Otto, a lover of logic and science, and you know some people like that, Enid, which is a weird name. I don't know where that came from. Is it? Enid, an academic, Frank, an evangelical Christian, Louise, a self-professed simple person, and of course, Robert himself. Those group of people are going to now question Robert on how he handled the situation. And so we're going to come back next week and talk about that, which will be enough for an hour. So, hey, everyone. Is there anything you want to say flying out of here?
Nope, nothing today, man.
Yeah, I haven't talked about what I feel like this is the conclusion of these 2 chapters yet. However, I can't wait to. And I also want to just encourage you guys to continue to follow this. Look at our premium membership. Look at there's some great, Reclaim is up there on audio in our premium membership. My book is up there, not only as a book, but as audio. And a lot of other good stuff on discipleship's up there. So go over there, subscribe. It helps keep this podcast alive. We put the money right back into the podcast, and it keeps paying for that monthly thing that we're doing. But we want to thank you guys for listening. Thank you for hearing our ramblings. And hopefully we're praying that you're getting and walking stronger in Christ as we are trying to. And we don't know everything, but we're trying. But thank you for listening to Inference Swap. Go there and subscribe. We'd love to hear from you on this. I don't know if you know this, but you can listen to us on YouTube as well. We're not going with video yet, but maybe one day we will, maybe in the future. But right now we just want to keep it in audio so we can keep this focus. But guys, we love you and we want to thank you for listening, and we will hit you up next week on another Inference Swap special. So we'll see you next week. Bye-bye now.